numbers that almost 1 million Russian soldiers have been killed. About 700,000 Ukrainian soldiers are killed. Russia's bigger, they have more soldiers to lose. But that's no way to run a country.
Fit called The Independent. You talk about the absence of reality reports. Quote, Putin rejects talks with Zelensky as North Korean cannon is deployed. Vladimir Putin is, quote, afraid of strong leaders, says President Zelensky. I don't know what President Zelensky thinks he can accomplish by insulting President Putin. Zelensky's not even the lawful leader of that country.
No, and for all intents and purposes, he's a Washington puppet. Why bother talking to him? He doesn't represent, quote unquote, the Ukrainian people or the will of the people. But here's something else. So you mentioned this North Korean nonsense. And I and all of my colleagues have looked high and low at every conceivable place that you could to find evidence for North Korean military presence in Ukraine. There is none. It's entirely a hoax. It's as much of a hoax as the Russia hoax was. But this is dredged up routinely to try and justify the false picture of the Russian military. They don't have enough men. They're running out of supplies. There are people objecting to the war in Russia. They can't recruit. All of it is a lie. Turn it around 180 degrees, and then you get what? You get the picture in Ukraine. So everything that's wrong in Ukraine is then imputed to Russia. I mean, the lying machine goes on without interruption. If President Trump does not act decisively to disrupt the lying and put the record straight, he won't last.
Can I tell you what President Trump should do? He should listen to you. That's what he should do. Instead, he has surrounded himself with sycophants and Zionists who are going to tell him what they think he wants to hear, just like Joe Biden did.
Well, again, he's got to pay attention to his donors. The donors brought him to the White House. Now, I once had a discussion. I was very fortunate, lasted 2.5 hours in private, with Cap Weinberger. And Cap Weinberger told me that Reagan came to Washington and all of these Californians came with him, until finally Weinberger and a couple of other members of his inner circle went to him and said, listen, Mr. President, they're nice people, but you got to send them home. We have to govern the country. This is not about their agendas or what they thought was important. You're now the president of the United States. We've got to do what's in the U.S. interest. I think somebody needs to have a discussion like that with the president. But I don't know of anybody with the stature and the influence of someone like Cap Weinberger that could make such a statement.
Ukraine has been devastated.
Devastated.
Will it be a negotiated settlement, and will you lead the negotiation?
Well, I hope so. And I put out a truth today that's really strong, and I mean it. And if they don't do that, I'm going to put massive
If
tariffs.
They don't do what?
If they don't settle this war soon, like almost immediately, I'm going to put massive tariffs on Russia and massive taxes and also big sanctions. And I don't want to do that. I love the Russian people. They're great people. I don't want to do that. But we got to get this war ended.
The Russian economy is not doing badly. And by some accounts, it's doing quite well. So the idea that he's going to really damage the Russian economy, I believe doesn't make any sense. But furthermore, let's assume that he can really hurt the Russian economy. The question you want to ask yourself is, what will the Russians do? Will they capitulate? I do not think they will capitulate, because the Russians believe that Ukraine in NATO, they believe that the West winning is an existential threat to Russia. So the Russians are committed to pay an enormous price to prevail in Ukraine.
Small, given the scale of these things, it's only about 320 million a year. Okay, bottom line, does Trump know what he's talking about?
I don't understand what Trump is doing here. It's remarkably foolish. There's no question that he stands a reasonable chance of working out some sort of deal with the Russians. But for that to happen, he really has to deal with Putin in a sophisticated way, and he has to treat Putin with great respect. He has to show appreciation for Russia's position. This is all absolutely necessary if he's going to get a deal. The idea that he can sort of slap Putin around and treat him like he's a second-rate citizen in the international system and force Putin to do what Trump wants him to do is ludicrous. I mean, I just don't understand what he's thinking here.
Where is he getting his intel from if he's using Joe Biden statistics on the number of Russians killed, which he says is over 1 million? There is no credible source for that of which I'm aware at all.
No, that's not even close. I mean, there are not even 1 million Russian casualties, which would include wounded plus killed, and wounded always outnumber killed by, around 3 to 1. So the argument that over 1 million Russians have died in this war is not a serious argument.
Missouri. So I think, it would be useful if somebody sat down with President Trump, if he would listen, provide him with some truth instead of lies about the great Ukrainian success story, point to the absolutely systemic corruption, and say it's time for us to get out of this thing. We can't fix it. We don't want to rule it. We don't want to pay for it. We're out. But we'll be happy to host a conference. And the Russians would take that as a very positive development because they're tired of us trying to impose things on them. And we don't want war with Russia. You see, this is the other problem. Everybody is promoting hostility to Russia in Washington. But we don't need it. We don't want it. There's no reason for it. But you have this phony dichotomy. You have the democratic states on one side and the authoritarians on the other. I mean, it's a false dichotomy. It makes no sense at all. But that's the sort of lie that continues to be promoted. That's General Hodges and everybody like you.
And, one of the other popular lies that has also continued on throughout this is the claim that says, hey, the Russian is out to get you. If he gets Ukraine, he is definitely going to go to the West and he's going to conquer everybody because he wants to recreate the Soviet Union, et cetera. You mentioned something at the beginning of this, and Lavrov actually yesterday at a press conference addressed some of that they are focused not on conquering land in the West. They are focused on protecting the ethnic Russians in the eastern part of what was Ukraine.
The return of Donald Trump has fueled speculation of a peace deal in Ukraine. Is he the master deal maker he claims to be? And how far is Russia willing to go? What concessions are you willing to make to reach an agreement?
Neither the narrative nor anyone's discourse has addressed the rights of Russians, whose language, whose culture, education, media, and whose canonical religion were banned by law in Ukraine. There will be no serious conversations if the West pretends that this is normal. And when the outgoing administration in the person of Blinken and Sullivan says that they are confident that the new White House will continue the policy of supporting Ukraine. Is this a testament to exterminate everything Russian is?
Everything that Kellogg said is nonsense. Imagine, even if it were possible, and it's not possible for us to drive the price down to $25 a barrel, but if it were, what would that do to our domestic oil and natural gas industry?
Right.
Catastrophic.
Yeah.
This is just stupid. This is a one long string of stupidities strung together. President Trump needs to get rid of all these people. They're giving him such bad advice. We cannot determine the outcome in eastern Ukraine. We don't have the power, we don't have the resolve, and we do not have the backing of the American people for a major regional war to influence anything. So who's going to decide the outcome? Answer, Moscow. Moscow will decide the outcome. Who is this man Zelensky? He is nothing. He is a puppet at the top of a criminal regime, an organized crime state that we've kept flush with cash. He can go tomorrow morning if we want him to go. This has no use whatsoever to talk about Zelensky as an important player. He has no legitimacy. He's done everything in his power to shut down democracy, destroy human rights. It's a waste of time even speaking about Zelensky. He just needs to be removed. And if the United States government wants him to go, he will go.
Well, apparently the United States government at least hasn't so far wanted him to go. And another constituency that doesn't seems to be the European Union, because they gave him a big opportunity here to speak in front of a group at Davos.
If there are no strong security guarantees, no NATO, no military contingent deployed, no long-range weaponry, how do you think, if Putin comes back, he will definitely come back with the army 10 times more than the grouping he had in the very beginning of 2022, because it is already almost 4.5 times more than it was. And when he comes back with this grouping for the full occupation of the countries that are former republics of the USSR, that is number one, and then he will do what he has done with our Crimea. He will be coming to other EU and NATO countries to stand there, to issue those ultimatums, to make demands to the countries. He will be bringing us and you, everybody, to the world that lives in his head. This is what will be happening in case there are no strong security guarantees.
I thought it was ironic that there at the end he said that Putin is the one who is creating fiction in his head that doesn't exist. And gracious, when you look at a map and you look at the what's happened over the last, 18 months or so, just as a minimum, there's probably somebody who's not looking at things realistically, and it isn't coming out of Moscow.
Well, this is an artificial world created by the so-called globalists, neocons, whatever you want to call them, that have hijacked our government and gained control of most of the governments, certainly in Western Europe. And in this artificial world, those kinds of statements are taken seriously. We know they're all nonsense. President Putin has absolutely no interest in marching further west, but he's going to do whatever is required to secure his country's interests in Eastern Europe. That's very simple. And right now, that's stabilizing Eastern Ukraine, coming to a new territorial arrangement, and hopefully with us and our so-called European allies, some sort of arrangement regarding the size and movement of forces. You know, one of the more disturbing things that I've heard recently is an attempt to link nuclear arms reductions to some sort of deal in Ukraine. The Russians are happy to talk to us about reductions in nuclear armaments, but it's not going to be linked to Ukraine. Ukraine is an entirely different set of circumstances, but it's back to this notion of we want Ukraine to join NATO. By the time this war ends, I don't think there will be a NATO. This is self-delusion on a titanic scale. You know, there's something else that's wrong here. President Trump is not a stupid man. He knows this is not his war. He's under no obligation to pick it up and carry it forward. He's making a mistake that Nixon made in 1968 or 1969 by pressing forward into Cambodia, widening the war, ultimately sustaining more casualties, more human losses after he becomes president than Johnson sustained while he was president. This is unnecessary. President Trump needs to get out of it. He has a very, very ambitious domestic policy agenda. If he wants to achieve anything with that domestic policy agenda, he needs to shut down these overseas adventures. None of these things are important to us as Americans. Not a bit.
Closing.
I think it's important for Donald Trump to understand that the people, especially his foreign policy advisors, are not Trump's friends. Okay, they're working against Donald Trump because the advice they're
Kellogg's
giving
definitely
is
bad news.
Okay, bad advice. Okay, and so United States right now, they have no concrete peace plan that they can propose to Moscow, which is why, you know, it's taking so much time for actually Trump and Putin to talk to each other. Because what's acceptable to Washington is very far removed from Russia's basic needs. And if the Americans set out and, you know, appoint on one piece of paper their peace plan, and then put Russia's document their peace plan, minimum peace plan, side by side, it'll immediately become clear that there's no basis for negotiations. And moreover, Trump is trying to limit himself to Ukraine. But for Russia, Ukraine is a very small part of something much larger. And therefore, Russia will take its time to respond to Trump's verbal interventions and work to fulfill its task with special military operation, because for now at least time is on Russia's side. But that time is limited to a couple of years because the European Union is getting ready for a direct war with Russia within the next 5 years. Pistorius, that's German defense minister, he said so the other day. So Trump needs to freeze the war in Ukraine.
Well, they didn't just say so. Let me back you up. All the defense ministries, the UK running it all, the French, Macron, have said in the last 2 years hundreds of times, their new economic model is a 20 to 30-year long war with Russia, which any analyst will tell you will lead to nuclear war, continued encirclement, coups in any European countries that try to not be part of it, like we just saw in Romania. This is serious. Keep going.
Well, you know, so again, in addition to everything else, Trump needs to strengthen Taiwan as much as possible. This could possibly happen by introducing troops and deploying nuclear weapons on the island, and that wouldn't be the first time either. And so with a thought conflict in Ukraine behind him and another heated situation across the world, whether it's Canada, whether it's Panama, whether it's China, whether it's the Middle East, whether it's Africa, Southeast Asia, or Latin America, okay, Trump could find himself embroiled in a war on 3 or 4 or 5 different fronts. And I think that's what his team of traitors who are working with him on foreign policy, he got the wrong people in there. Just like, as far as I'm concerned, Marco Rubio is a deep state operative. He is not on Trump's team. And Trump, you know, he showed it in the first time around. He wasn't very good at picking a team. He had 2 people he could trust, Bannon and Flynn. The deep state got rid of them immediately, and he was left with the Boltons and the Pompeos and all these other people who in the end, you know, what happened? And so I think Trump has a problem with some of the people on his team, because when we hear, for example, Trump saying that Putin's not doing very well, 1 million Russians were killed, well, that's not true. We know that that's not true. Okay, the numbers are about 250,000 dead and maybe half a million wounded. It's a lot of people, but it's not 1 million dead. So
well, we know the morale of the Russians. They want more war than Putin's even doing, so dead troops is not affecting the Russians. Daniel Estelin.
Please visit my website at samstwitch.com. My Twitter profile is at samstwitch_sam. My YouTube channel is at youtube.com/samstwitch. I post videos that I cannot post on YouTube on my BitChute channel at bitshoot.com/samstwitch.